Hey folks, how are y'all doing today out there? We are stepping outside of the regular programming on this page that y'all tend with a gentleman by the name of Chris McBride. We're going to talk about something a bit different today. Of course, we're going to still get down with the regular programming at 4 p.m. with that live stream format that y'all are probably most familiar with on this page, where I do a live Q&A with everybody and we talk about mental health, happiness, and healing. From a background of evidence-based research and 20 years of experience in the field. But today we're going to be talking with Mr. McBride. Today again only from 2:15 to about 2:45 or so. Just send him an invite. We'll see if he comes on as corresponded and planned earlier. Oh, there you are, Mr. McBride. I sent you an invitation there. Hope that's coming up for you. Something that I talk about from time to time on this page is the importance of men's mental health. Now, again, just because talking about men's mental health does not mean that women's mental health is not also important. They're both very, very important. Human mental health is very important. However, men's mental health tends to be systematically ignored for a lot of different reasons. And hopefully we're going to get a little bit more into that today. How you doing, Chris?
Hello, man. How are you doing today?
Good, good. Was looking forward to talking with you today. Not many folks specialize specifically in what you do and have the chops for it. So I'm looking forward to shaking it up with you a little bit.
Definitely. My fault for the slight tardiness. I had started a live as well, so right on for shooting the invite because otherwise we both would have just been on live waiting for each other.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I have strong, nerdy, nutty professor streak in me, so it always takes a minute to figure out the how to connect the VHS with the TV, like when we were kids, right?
Oh man, I definitely appreciate you taking the time out, man. And really more, I was really wanting to kind of get your perspective on certain things. So I had a
Totally.
list of questions. I don't know if you had questions for me
Shoot.
as well, but I
Oh no. Looks like some connectivity issues potentially for Mr. McBride there. So as we're getting going, hopefully be able to join again. And if we ever have a stop to the programming like that or the conversation like that, please feel free to kick in with your own questions. All right, so you have some questions prepared? Shoot,
uh
man, go for it.
So basically, as a trauma pro and a licensed therapist, I was trying to get your perspective on what trauma actually is and then how it actually shows up for men based upon your experience.
Totally. Great question. A common question in one lens, and then in the other lens, how it shows up for men tends to not be asked very often. But I think the general assumption, what we're taught socially and culturally, is that men are built for anything, we're unbreakable, we can't be traumatized. I mean, it doesn't happen, which is ridiculous. So
Toxic masculinity.
it is completely unhealthy. I tend to call it traditional masculinity. Is a lot of times when the phrase toxic masculinity is used, it tends to drive a lot of fellas away from the table. Although I do like those elements of traditional masculinity are very dangerous to men as well as those around us. They get us sick, they keep us sick, and they make us a liability in community settings with each other and especially with more marginalized community members. Now, as far as what trauma is at a fundamental level, so we're all designed to deal with stress at some level, right? Like our organisms, our bodies have, and mind has evolved over eons of time to deal with the chaos of the cosmos. It's stressful out here. It is real. Now, with that said, so I want you to think about it as a range. So we're all programmed to deal with a certain amount of stress. At the beginning, that stress is actually called eustress. It's positive stress. Think about it as excitement, right? It's not perceived as a negative thing at all. In fact, a degree of that eustress has to be there um, for a flow state state to happen. It introduces a little bit of adrenaline, a little bit of cortisol, really kind of like juice up your gears to be motivated and into what you're into. Now, once you start getting beyond eustress, that positive stress, to break it down into a black and white, that's not truly black and white, but it'll help for the conversation. You start getting into distress. And this is where our level of mastery, our level of comfort with managing the variables in a given environment is beyond what we're familiar with and acclimated to. So it starts getting into distress. There starts being more adrenaline, more cortisol. Once the distress gets to a level that there's basically two variables, enough pain or enough lack of control, and both of those in conjunction with each other becomes dissociation. Our brain can no longer manage thoughts and feelings at the same time. We get really black and white. The amygdala, the part of our brain that gets focused on perceiving a threat, gets way overactivated, and we become really dysregulated. So it's really that breaking point between distress and the level of fragmentation that our brain starts practicing to keep itself safe. Essentially, it's a survival response, it's a protective mechanism. As far as how that, does that make sense
It
insofar as
does. It
trauma
does. It
and how
does.
okay, cool,
So
cool.
it's like we got certain chemicals that, like you said, cortisol, where in short spurts, like when you're driving really fast and you see the cops and that little thing hits your system, that's okay because it just makes you fully alert. But if that's constantly pumping through our system at all times, then that's when it becomes an issue for us.
Absolutely. And the cortisol is a big part of it. Really the most prominent aspect of it is adrenaline, which you just think about it as a fear hormone.
Is
Um,
that what causes the aggression in man a lot of times when we're dysregulated?
it causes aggression in all animals, including a fear aggressive dog. You know, it's the same thing. You know, there are not too many degrees of separation between these different hormones and in different mammals. Um, Now, when it comes to men, how men tend to go through this is there's so many social and cultural rules about what men are supposed to be able to identify with their masculinity, to be able to maintain the social location of manness. I guess we can call it right. And women are socialized with tends to be the opposite side of this spectrum, and all of this really comes from really oppressive narratives, really oppressive institutions that try to fragment us and dehumanize us in order to make us easier to control, right? Largely from isolated farming communities and clergy and royal families working with each other to pay one half of the poor to kill the other half, right? It's always been the easiest way to control communities and turn them into farms for money and soldiers. Now, a little bit of a macro rant there for a second, but I guess it is what it
I'm
is. Uh,
following though.
cool. Now, so how men tend to experience this, we get a lot of social and cultural conditioning and preparation to be emotionally restricted, to avoid showing emotion, especially vulnerable emotions, except for one, anger. We're taught that we can always be angry and retain our perceived level of masculinity, our masculine identity. So what it does is that expectation starts normalizing a fight or flight response, with the emphasis being on the fight component, right? Um, now, something that also happens is a lot of times for men, we're taught to be essentially ashamed of vulnerable emotions, not to speak openly about it, but what that shame does, it teaches us, like, if we affiliate with our vulnerable emotions, if we share them, we'll be perceived as less than. What the emotional experience, the feeling that goes along with this is shame. Now, what this does, it functions to help us repress the other emotions. And if that gets mashed on too hard, and it's used as a predominant way of managing this well of emotional experiences that is fundamentally human, it can slam into a freeze response. Looks like depression, right? And a lot of times research will even show that boys and men are most likely to exhibit depression through irritability. So like the research around emotions will show that anger is actually a secondary emotion. Think about like the tip of the iceberg. What's underneath of it, there's always a primary vulnerable emotion. Those primary emotions are fear, shame, and sadness. So there becomes to be this one place where men are allowed to express, socially and culturally, allowed to, as a norm, to express an emotional experience, and that's going to trend towards anger.
I agree completely, man. And you're right as far as especially the secondary emotion, because most of it, like you said, is unresolved sadness or is fear. And because we're not really conditioned to be able to express that or articulate, especially as boys, we kind of like stack it. Can you speak a little bit about how like these things can mutate into and start to kind of like conflate all together? So as a man starts to seek therapy, if he does even start to seek therapy, most of the time, unfortunately, all of my clients are around the age of 40 and above, and they haven't really experienced therapy prior to that. So they got all of these emotions, like you said, underlying it, but it's like mutated now. So a lot of times they come to therapy for current problems or current day reactions, but inevitably it's always tied to something most likely way in the past, a lot of times unresolved childhood,
Mm-hmm.
but for them, because it's been repressed for so long and it's mutated into so many other things and conflated with so many other things, they can't really track it to the source. Can you speak a little bit to that? I know that was a long question,
No,
but hopefully it
well,
made sense.
again, I'm totally tracking what you're saying, and it sounds like you've been working with men a lot. Is there are layers of I would think about it as layers of scar tissue that have to be broken through in order to get to that authentic, vulnerable emotional experience, which again, like are essential for starting to grieve what has happened and accept what we can't control, so we can be reborn on the other side and accept whatever internal locus of control we actually have. And so a lot of times men will just be numb or angry, and then underneath of that tends to be layers of anxiety, and then underneath that tend to be layers of shame, and then once you get under that, there's a thick bed of unprocessed grief. Sometimes there's trauma, sometimes it's little t trauma, sometimes big T trauma, sometimes it's both, sometimes not there. But regardless, there's a lot of grief and sadness that has to be able to be processed, which requires you got to feel it to heal. You got to name it and tame it. There's this bed of emotions that has to be worked through. And meanwhile, all this fella knows how to do is ram on a power chord, and they have like one note on 52 keys that they know how to play. There's a lot of practice and attunement that goes along with learning how to play the rest of your scales.
I think that's a beautiful analogy. I always talk about it. It's like our emotions are like colors. Like we look at it as like Roy G. Biv, just
Write
the
it down.
basic
Yep.
colors. But
Yep.
if you really look at all the different colors, those seven colors can really span out to like something close to like a million different shades. And that's really how our emotions are. But we just label it, I'm angry, I'm scared, I'm sad. And we don't really have the I think also lacking the vocabulary to articulate our experience sometimes kind of helps the traumatization. Like I know language patterns play a huge factor. I always give the example of if me and you were in a little fender bender and I said, if I hit your car, I'd be like, oh, I tapped your car. That language doesn't really create an emotional experience like that. But if you're like, man, you totaled my car or you crashed my car, even though we could be describing the exact same experience, the language that we place on the particular situation will enhance or kind of lessen the emotional charge to the situation. And I think a lot of times, man, we don't really have the vocabulary that lessens the emotional experience. Most of the time, our vocabulary is going to amp up the emotional experience. What's your thoughts on that particular situation?
Absolutely, and not only in two distinct different ways. One with ourselves, we don't know how to a lot of times name our own emotional experiences and figure out how they get back to whatever needs are met or unmet for our own personal integrity, which is really the point of emotions period. Like we are energetic animals, humans, and emotions are energy. And if you like hooked us up to a fMRI, that energy would be electricity through neuron connections and hormones, and they're designed to bring us towards goals or away from something that doesn't meet it. So we become so disintegrated and unintegrated that as we're not taught or misinformed about what these things are and how we should be moving through them, that we don't learn how to do that for ourselves. And it also inhibits us from connecting meaningfully to other humans. So the basis of connection, of intimacy, is mutual vulnerability, is being able to mutually share vulnerable emotional experiences and contain space with each other and co-regulate. That's what healthy attachment is. That's what emotional intimacy is in a romantic relationship. That's what a fireside chat is in a business where there's a lot of stuff going on with a trustworthy servant leader as a CEO. That's the building block of true authentic connection. So we get left unintegrated on our own, and then in doing so, we don't know enough notes or have access to enough colors to paint a portrait or sing a song or play the blues with other humans, like we are designed at a fundamental level to do.
I agree wholeheartedly. I love how you speak in metaphor and analogies. I think that's a great way to really connect with the spirit. You had mentioned as far as how our nervous system is designed to like move away or move towards certain things. And I think that's a key function as well that men and women kind of suffer from. But the conversation that we're having is on men. Where I always tell men, like you said, our nervous system is constantly trying to move towards things and move away from things. Now in Western society, we're always focused on goals. So what you're trying to move towards. But a lot of men, we suffer from self-sabotage because we're never really recognizing what we're moving away from, and that's tied to not our unresolved trauma. So if we have a failed business experience, if we had a failed relationship, if we had a failed whatever, and we didn't learn how to resolve it and we internalize it as a failure, now all of a sudden, even though we may want to move towards love, but we fear rejection, so we're going to sabotage. Or we move towards love, but we fear hurt, so we're going to sabotage it. Or we want to move towards success in business, but again, we're scared of rejection or we're scared of failure, so we're going to sabotage it. So I think it's very important for men. I always tell them to you got to learn your nervous system, which you got to spend time with yourself, and you got to learn what you're naturally moving towards and moving away from. Because again, if we're only focused on what we're moving towards, as soon as we get close to it, if it has any resemblance of what your nervous system is trying to move away from, you're going to self-sabotage. So you got to be aware of your nervous system. And also, like you said, with the inability of being able to connect with other people, a lot of times we don't learn the other person that we're dealing with nervous system. So we'll be like, well, that doesn't trigger me, so I don't know why it makes you so bad or why it makes you feel some type of way. And it's just like,
Wrong with
dude,
you.
yeah, that's not how it works. You gotta learn their nervous system, you gotta learn your nervous system, and both people got to deal with each other accordingly.
Oh yeah, and it gets reinforced in a lot of different ways by our culture, by Western European culture, um, where taught that men should be dominant, men and women should be submissive, and like that's not the intention. That might have been the intention behind silverback gorillas, but with human beings, um, being a true leader means being trustworthy through stress, through tension, which means being highly attuned, especially to the most vulnerable and marginalized people in the room. It's who does everybody go to when the proverbial crap hits the fan? That's the leader. It's not the person who can deadlift the most. Like, can we eat silverback gorillas anymore? We've evolved a lot since then. And there's some comments in the section saying like unity and a lot of this. You have to have the basic assumption that we are each other.
You said being trustworthy through stress. I think that's key. I haven't heard it language that way before, but that resonates a lot with me, especially I was listening to one of my coaches. I was on a coaching call, and he was talking about how, the reason why he's in leadership is because it's so easy for him to overlook an offense. as opposed to why men, certain men, and I've been guilty of this, oh, that'll never be me. Oh, you say something to me, oh, I'm a challenge and I ain't about to back down at all. I ain't never about to let you say nothing disrespectful to me. I ain't never about to. And so, to your point, in those stressful situations, it's not, that's not necessarily being trustworthy, especially because a lot of times my son's mom's father would always say nobody appreciates the warrior until the enemy is at the gate. But I always like to tell men is like that enemy is really, or the warrior is always supposed to only be activated for people that's not your family or not your loved ones. But sometimes that warrior can get activated in the household, whether we unnecessarily activate it towards our kids, we get frustrated. And I've been guilty of this. I'm preoccupied with something at work and my son wants my attention and all that. And I might lash out in a little anger or something like that. Or again, preoccupied with something else that I got to get done. And then my lady might want some time and attention and I get frustrated because I got to work, I got to do this. And then the warrior can come out in the household. And I always tell there's no, every behavior has a positive context. It's just about putting that behavior in that context and only letting that behavior come out in that context. So my son's mom and her brother, they grew up in a violent household. And so the bro, I was talking to her brother one day and he was like, man, I hate the fact that I'm aggressive. And I was like, look, brother, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So that aggression is good. It's just putting it in the right
Gotta be in the
context.
right place. Gotta be in the right place. And
Exactly.
a lot of times it's helpful in that context to think about the love of power versus the power of love. And it's never, if the context is using anger or aggression to try to control something across from you, it's never the right context. If it's about protecting something or some people you love behind you, that's the power of love, right? And you don't take me as a pacifist. Don't, that's saying at all. Um, and have a 8-year-old son who's a bang up little wrestler. He's this like tiny little dude who's just like all skin, bones, and muscle, really low BMI, and as game as the day is long. And as soon as he puts his hands on someone at school or on the bus, if he's not fighting his way out of the corner, you don't go to wrestling this week. And you do chores around the house and in the yard to pay for those classes. Not because it's putting us out, not because we can't extend ourselves to the, like, not because, but because you lost the right to train this week. And you have to cover your own butt when you make that decision, even if it felt like an impulsive one, even if you didn't allow yourself to think about it very much. You were trying to control something, and you never get to use your body to do that.
I agree wholeheartedly. It's like when it's like we got social control and self-control, but when our self-control seems to drop a little bit, that's when we want to increase the social control. We want to exert our control over other people or impose our will on other people as opposed to keeping ourselves under control. And we always find an excuse or a reason, especially as an adult, and it's hard to I always I had a revelation a couple months ago where it's like kids are more influenced by what we demonstrate as opposed to what we instruct.
Oh,
So a
yeah.
lot of times we try to tell our kids, yo, be patient. Like my son was trying to get my attention and I was making his food and all that. And I was like, son, you got to be patient. And
While we
then it
say you're
dawned on
patient.
me,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I was like, well, you probably should be patient while you're telling him to be patient. You got to be patient with him
Yeah.
while you're trying to tell him to be patient. And I was on a live with another therapist, and we were kind of talking about, she specializes with children. And she was saying how it's so interesting how a lot of parents come and they want to discipline their kids for not being regulated, but the parents come in dysregulated. And it's like,
Cannot handle.
and most of the time, your kid is just mirroring what they actually experience in the home. So my son's only 22 months old. So I've
Congratulations.
been having a lot, thank you. I've been having a lot of revelations as being a first time parent and just kind of learning this whole thing. But it's a real goal of mine in protecting his nervous system. Again, not making him passive, not trying to shield him because the world is going to be what it is, but not trying to cause unnecessary trauma to him. And it's a lot too, because I mean, if my voice goes past a certain threshold, I've never touched my son. I don't do that. My dad only touched me one time when I was 16. He called my girl a bitch and I stood up to him and he just punched me in my chest one time. But other than that, my father's never touched me ever. And so same thing with my son, but I got to watch my tone with my son. Like, cause if it goes past a certain threshold, little CJ the Great is going to cry. So it requires a lot of self control on my end. Now I'm human. I still get frustrated. We was on
Sure.
a plane yesterday, an airplane, and he, was up. It was way past his bedtime. He wouldn't go to sleep though, so he was, and I found myself getting frustrated. So I just had to hand him to my mom. I'm like, give me a little second. I'm
And
learning just to be quiet as opposed to acting out of my emotions and all that stuff because we're human, so we're all going to feel the emotions, but it's what you choose to do in that particular emotion as opposed to cussing at him or yelling at him or spazzing at him or doing all these things and then getting mad when he tries to replicate that behavior later on. And I think that's really tying it back to what we were talking about as far as men and our emotional issues.
yeah,
For the men who were lucky enough to have a man around growing up, that's really what it was. Like we were taught to be, oh, you got to be in control all the time. You need to calm down. You need to do this. You need to be quiet. You need to sit still. You need to, but we're just watching adults be completely dysregulated, watching adults just being completely out of control. And so it creates like this issue in our mind because again, we are instructed a certain thing, but what we're watching them demonstrate is completely the
we have
opposite.
totally different experiences with our caretakers, and that's how humans learn is through experiences. Whether we're kids, and that's why the relationship with our caretakers is a privileged one. It's a sacred one because we don't get to consent to it, and they're as children, and they're responsible for taking care of us, and they're at the helm of most of our experiences. And it's the same for adults. That we don't learn outside of different experiences. Dr. Brene Brown calls it the arena. You have to get in the arena. Theology calls it trials and tribulations. But they're all talking about the same thing. It's experiences. And we have to be really, really careful to make sure that, as the old timers would say, that we don't necessarily have to say on our own, do as I say, not as I do, that we model exactly what we want from the people who look to us to be leaders.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I know we're wrapping up, and that's why I think it's important for parents. And I always tell my clients, you- at least when I grew up, it was always, parents really only wanted you to see the good things.
Yeah,
So, but anytime it was conflict resolution going on, you had to leave the room. Anytime it was, mommy and daddy are sad, you got to leave the room because they don't want to see that. They don't want to be perceived
yeah,
as weak. But the issue is that without a vision, people perish, and without an image in your mind, it causes confusion. So we don't have models from when we grew up of how do we handle sadness in a positive way?
yeah.
How do I handle anger or disappointment in a positive way? How do I hold somebody accountable in a positive way? How do I handle conflict resolution in the home in a positive way? So we don't have that. So we seek other models. And unfortunately, we're going TV, social media, all these other things, which isn't really a healthy model for it. And I think that's another challenge that man faces the models of all right, have you seen somebody actually sit in sadness? Have you seen somebody actually just be comfortable in whatever negative emotions and knowing that it's fleeting and knowing that it's going to pass? Not feeling like, oh, I got to go eat something real quick so I can make myself feel better, or I got to watch something to make myself feel better, or I got to go engage in sex because I can't calm myself down because my anxiety is higher, or I'm fearful, or I'm scared, or I'm hurting, or whatever it is. We haven't seen men be able to process these emotions in healthy ways, so it causes us to really engage in self-destructive tendencies because that's really all we're going to model off of TV shows, music, off of movies, which again aren't really giving us healthy examples. It's too dramatized because it wants to get our attention. It's never really focused on
Yeah.
reality.
It's trying to sell you ad space. Um, and I think people underestimate how important it is to get vulnerable with our children, not to make them our companions, not to ask for them to hold space with us, but to give them a story of someone who they idealize most in this world. Whether you're a parent out there, like that's you. They think you are the bee's freaking knees because you have a privileged, sacred relationship with your child. So, you know, when they're sad or when they're lonely, when they're insecure, ashamed of themselves, tell them a story about a time that you felt the same way and what you did and how you managed it. Um, Give them something they can identify with someone who they think is larger than life.
Facts. And I agree. And I know we're right at the time. And that's why, like, you could also learn a lot from your kids too, because my son, I've always struggled with forgiveness, and my son teaches me how easy it is to forgive. Because, like I said, I can lose my temper sometimes, and it doesn't matter. My son will just, as soon as he sees me, he just lights up,
Yeah.
and he just wants to be around me. He's daddy, and I'll just be like, man, like I need to learn. Yeah, I'm modeling something from you now, as far as how to actually just get over grudges, how to forgive, how to let go,
How
how
to
to
love.
how
Yeah.
to love
Yeah.
unconditionally, real unconditional love. Like that's what a kid will actually show you, because as adults we'll say it, but then we be treating adults some type of way. We get silent, we get aggressive, we want to, almost nitpick or just kind of like get secret revenge or whatever. But a kid doesn't want any of that. A kid will really show you a lot of things as far as emotional availability and emotional intelligence. So it's about, yeah, you got to teach your kid a lot too, but we can also learn a lot from them.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate you giving me the time.
Absolutely. I appreciate you being available to engage in dialogue. It was, I had a lot of fun having this conversation with you,
Likewise.
and I appreciate you giving me the time and being willing to authentically encounter me here. And, you know, we can model having some of these conversations as professionals in this space who also happen to be men. I think that probably goes farther than you and I could even imagine. So thanks a lot, Mr. Chris. And I, appreciate all the support and hope we can have another one of these sometime soon.
I look forward to it. Will you be saving this live?
I will.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah, definitely. And I look forward to it again. Whenever you want to have another one, I'll definitely be available.
Cool. You take it easy out there, mister. Give that little 22-month-old a pat on the head for me, all right?
You do the same with your son.
Thank you,
Peace.
sir. All right, folks. Y'all saw it. That was whew, that was a happening conversation there with Mr. Chris McBride. You can check out his page. I'll drop a link in the saved post from this. I'm still going to come on at 4 p.m. today, or 4 p.m. East Coast time in the States where I'm at currently, in roughly an hour and 10 minutes. I have a client that I'm meeting with at 3, and then right after, I'm going to come on to a live stream and answer a lot of y'all's questions that y'all pose for me about mental health, healing, and happiness, or questions about the content that you see here, and doing a live Q&A to share those learning opportunities with everybody. But I'm going to save this live stream on the page, on the old profile grid, I think is what Zuckerberg wants us to call it, at least. And I hope y'all check the whole thing out if you didn't have time to see it. That was a amazing dialogue with Mr. Chris McBride there. Hope y'all have a nice hour and 10 minutes, and I'll see you on the flip side. Peace.